Well, welcome everyone to this session. We're running well ahead of schedule already, which is just great to begin with. Um, so we're going to take about an hour and a half together. Um, to begin with, we're going to explain just from the three of us our perspectives on what this word or what this concept of musical enlivenment or enlivening means. And then we're going to obviously send you off to discuss these things amongst yourselves and see if we can bring forth a little bit of meaning as a group. Um, we've talked about already, and just to remind you, sort of some Zoom etiquette for this session around naming yourselves on the screen, and and we especially encourage you when we send you into the breakout sessions to say just a quick hello to each other and then get right to the discussion, because you won't have too much time in there to discuss. And we're going to be asking you some pretty deep questions that will need some good time. Now, some of you may have heard this term musical enlivening before, and we're each going to take a few minutes just to give you a little overview of what it means for us or our encounter with it. I first came across this term from one of my professors while I was doing a sacred music degree, and Michael Hahn actually borrowed this term himself from a Roman Catholic writer, Michael Warren. But essentially, the musical enlivener is a bit of a broader term than a music director or even minister of music, but is the kind of person who guides the assembly into responding to musical style, trying to respect the original context of the song, so where the song comes from, as well as provide a bridge from there to the receiving culture or the receiving group of people. Now, I have encountered this most obviously in working with global music, with songs from around the world, which come to us from a variety of contexts and cultures, and which we're introducing into often predominantly white congregations here in Canada. And I always find that there's at least one Sunday, if not several Sundays a year, where I come up against the why, the how, and the what of doing this. Is this okay that I'm leading it in this way? And we're certainly going to be asking you these questions in this session. I like to think about this for myself as a role that we step into. The enlivener is distinguished from the bureaucrat. So the bureaucrat of the congregation has a function, right? They're maintaining the institution, they're ticking off the boxes, they're signing the checks or whatever it is. The enlivener has a kind of prophetic and priestly role, whether we are those things in and of ourselves. We are trying to bring back together the idea that song is prayer. And through these songs, wherever they might come from, whether they're from our sort of traditional hymns or other cultural practices, they are teaching us to pray in new ways and to have empathy or interpathy, right, for other cultural and spiritual practices. What I have found too is that this really shifts how I think of myself in my first vocation as an organist. It's not always, as we will talk about, getting up in front of the congregation and leading with your hands or singing a cappella or with new instruments or new cultural traditions. Sometimes this means, for me, rethinking how I play and lead as an organist. of being sensitive to the text, of using the organ in new ways, of trying interesting things with registrations, all the while trying to lift up for people, to invite people to be enlivened in their singing. So I'll pass the mic off now to Jason, who will offer his few words about it.
Thanks, Josh, for that great introduction. I grew up in a Methodist tradition and moved into the United Church of Canada, which of course feels like home for a Methodist in many ways. And of course, I've grown up with that imperative, not just from the scriptures to sing, but also that Wesleyan imperative to sing, not only sing, but sing lustily. And I keep that in the back of my head because I think that my experience singing is that when I sing, I feel changed, that something happens fundamentally when I sing. And I think people around us also can experience that. I have been growing aware that as we've been coming back to church, that people are not singing quite as much as they did before we left on this extended break. And I know when I sing, my brain feels different. My heart feels different. There are chemical things. There are physiological things. There are parts of me, spiritual things, that are deeply impacted by singing. And so I think for the first number of years of my ministry, I maybe wasn't putting a lot of that together, and I still don't have the scientific words to talk about that with a lot of precision. But I can say that when I come to church, I feel one way, or when I come to choir practice, I feel one way, and when I leave, I feel different. So for me, music enlivening is around how do we help everyone feel that way? Not just people who are confident in their voice, but people who aren't. People who feel like, oh, I'm not sure I want to sing in this space right now. I'm not sure I have the tools to really live into the psalmist's imperative to sing to the Lord. Like there is a sense that we have often left people who aren't confident in their voices a little in the shadows in our congregational singing. And as wonderful as the tools of a hymn book and an organ and a choir are to us, there is something sometimes missing in that kind of worship leading, where those who don't know how to read music and are not sure how to follow along, they don't fully find their voice. And so I think marrying some of the principles of music, more sort of embodied music enlivening, to some of our other traditional vehicles for leading worship is a great way to help others who aren't as confident still to lift their voice and to have that experience of when we sing together, we leave changed somehow. I would add to Josh's note around the organ that one of the greatest compliments shortly after I came to church here, I may have ever received as a musical collaborator, was an elderly gentleman came to the front of the church and said, whatever it is you're doing, when you play the piano, I can sing easily. And I thought that's a really lovely thing to say as someone who wants, for me to receive as someone who wants to help other people sing. Something about how I was playing the melody in octaves helped them to hear it better. The accompaniment was chosen in a way that helped to undergird. Whatever it was, I would add to Josh's note that there are many things we can do to help the congregation to find their voice. So wherever we find ourselves, whatever skills we bring to the table, it's sort of about finding what is it we can put out there into the space to help people, to help them feel supported and move in that direction. And we get to explore in a little bit some of the why questions, and those are some of my favorite questions around singing. And I would just throw this little note out into the group before I pass it on to Bruce, that one of my great concerns right now is that as we have moved from being in church together to being at home together, often participating via live stream and other ways of doing worship, that we have started to, as a community, morph into a more consumeristic kind of worshiper, more like what we might experience if we were going to hear the Thunder Bay Symphony Orchestra, or the Canadian Opera, where we sit and we consume. We're hearing people do things on the screen and we're taking it in, and then we get back into the pew, and there are those performers up there singing, and it's still hitting us like a performance, hitting people like a performance. They're receiving it that way, and there's something about the way people often, the Netflix kind of generation we have here now, where we just love actually sitting and receiving kind of entertainment, and so kind of helping to restart and reimagine and reignite people's musical sensibilities, and what we can do to kind of poke those buttons again, so that people are opening their mouths and remembering, oh yeah, this is not entertainment, this is not Bruce playing the guitar so that my ear can enjoy it. It's actually something to help stir my heart and stir my imagination and help me to lean deeper into what it means to know God and to understand the community and the theological pieces around that. How when we hear and sing music, it lands in us and it becomes the thing we go to. I'm way more interested at the end of the day to be humming an Alleluia than Justin Bieber's Peach song from Georgia or whatever it is I hear on the radio. Like, I want the right songs to kind of land and be there. So let me do a lateral pass to Bruce, and we'll keep talking about music enlivenment here.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you, Jason. Wow, you two, I don't know how much I need to add to that. I guess I could share some of my own personal journey in musical enlivening. I grew up in a family of musical enliveners. Both of my parents are clergy, and some of my earliest experiences in church are of either one of them stepping out to the front of the congregation and teaching a new song, using hand gestures, and so on. And musical artists like the Klussmeyers and the Strathdys were regular guests in our home and in our church communities, and they modeled for me how to do that kind of work. But then, when I entered my own professional life in music and started working in congregational ministry back in the late 80s, I had been to university. I'd studied choral conducting, vocal technique and all of those kinds of things. And my role was to work with the choir. And that's how people saw me. And they said to me quite clearly, our last choir director used to stand and direct the congregation. You're not going to do that, are you? And I said, no, I won't. Because that seemed like a performance kind of thing. So I shook my head, and it took me a few years to process that. But there I am working with the choir, and yet I could hear always behind me, in this particular congregation, there was a huge group of men who would sing down the octave. There's this big volume of male sound, and none of them are in the choir. Like, how do we lift up the entire voice of our community rather than just those who choose to be in that volunteer role in our choirs and so on? And so, by the time I was into my second church and beyond, I have always seen myself as a song leader, as a musical enlivener, rather than a director. And the musical direction I do is secondary to that role. So I've worked hard on developing skills and so on, and continue to grow into that role, learning all the time. And I'm grateful to see, as Jason says, when people take songs into their hearts, when you have a little child who comes up to you, who is hardly even speaking yet, and they're singing something like Amen to you, that's a beautiful thing, to know that we're planting songs deeply in people's hearts. And yes, I'd rather have them singing Amen and Alleluia, etc., than the latest Justin Bieber song as well. So I'm with you on that. Thank you.
So we're going to send you off right away into our first breakout room question. So as I said, you've only got about 6, maybe 7 minutes in there. So when you get into your room, give your quick name intro, where you're from, and then get right into it.
And what size groups are we asking for, Josh? So
Uh,
Sartu knows.
4 to 5 people per group.
And let me just mention to whoever is breaking out there that Margaret and Deb Bradley and I will be here in person, so we'll reject our group and just be here. Okay, so I'm not sure how that factors into the group setting, but
Well, maybe say 5 in a group then, because then if somebody has to drop out, there's still 4 people there. Thank you, Sartu, for making that happen.
and how long do we have, Josh? Did you say?
Got about 6 to 7 minutes.
Okay.
So our first question is a bit of a broader one before we get deep into the sort of you as musical enliveners is what do you do when you teach or you lead new music? Um, as musicians, we're always introducing new songs to sing or to hear or to receive new settings for the liturgy or for worship. And how do you go about introducing that into your congregation? So take 6 or 7 minutes, and then we'll come back and share together for about 15 minutes before we head off into the next thing. All right, you should be getting an invitation soon.
Sorry if we didn't give you enough warning, Sartu.
Just chat among yourself for a little bit.
Okay.
What we're asking for is current practice too. What kinds of things do you do in your ministry right now? And then we'll come back and you can share some of those and we'll add to it with some reflections from the 3 of us. So sorry, we should have given Sartu a bit more warning.
You can also share, if you haven't had direct experience with this, or maybe you have, what have you observed others doing and what's worked, what has not worked in your opinion, and, start to think about why, like what is going on here that makes this so good or a little edgy, and maybe how do other people respond around you? Are you seeing people who are like, oh yeah, this is great, and other people are like, ooh, I'm feeling a little on edge about this too.
Okay.
Okay, we're good now, kid. All right, here you go. Invitation coming. I hope you all had a wonderful conversation, of course, about this. And this is an opportunity now to share what might have come up, your questions, your comments, your concerns. And for us, both the 3 of us who are sort of moderating this, but for us as a group to kind of respond to some of these things. So tell us, what do you do when you introduce or teach or lead new music in your congregation? What did you learn about each other and your techniques? Maybe use the raise hand function, which is down on the reactions thing at the bottom. Okay. And we'll call on you from there. Debbie, what do you have for us?
Okay, I am the spokesperson for our group.
Great.
So I think there was some differences for sure. There was sort of some of our congregations were really open to like learning things before the service, sort of lining out, that kind of thing, and having like a teaching moment as part of the announcements or whatnot. And then some of the congregations not as receptive to that. And the musicians are having to, sneak some stuff into the prelude or, make sure that they distribute their choir members amongst the congregation was one idea that somebody had and things like that. So I think it was very contextual in terms of the culture of the specific congregation and what they were open to and what they weren't.
So that's a good thing to hear. So part of the role of a musical enlivener is certainly a pastoral dimension to it. When we talk about having a priestly or a prophetic function, You are someone who knows the people with whom you are working and trying to challenge them, but also encourage them or enliven them into song, and knowing the best way in which to bring something to them, and also how to do it. So I would generally, when I was enlivening song for my congregation, I would get up at the beginning of the service as people are gathering before the prelude, and I'd say welcome. And quickly they learned that this meant that something unusual was going to happen. And eventually they learned, okay, this means he's going to make us do something that we're not comfortable with, like sing in another language or sing without the organ accompanying us. Or during the pandemic, when we weren't singing, it meant that I was going to hand out a variety of percussion instruments for them to participate, which early on was a bit of a freak out for them. But that was the time I would get up and I would sort of say, welcome, and here's something that we're going to experience in the service, and teach it bit by bit. So I would sing it all the way through and then sing a line and just use the very simple hand gestures. So I'm singing now, and I would sing, and then it's your turn, and we go through it all the way. And you could always see it in their faces. They would hear it once through and be completely terrified, and then we'd go through line by line, and it was okay. And often I would mess up, or periodically I would mess up, and that sometimes helped ease or diffuse the tension, until they learned to trust that they too could do it. Jason?
Josh, I was going to say, I noticed that Deb has her hand up there, so maybe she'd like to come in next.
Deb?
Here, I'll take the mask off so you have half a shot of seeing what I look like. Yeah, in talking about resistance, thanks, Josh, for that, because in our group, we talked about that a little bit. And I've been fortunate to be in congregations where ministry really supported the attempt to expand the congregation's repertoire and willingness to engage with music of other cultures or more contemporary styles of music and various things. And so even when there was resistance at first, we might give it a rest for a few weeks, but not too long. And we'd come back and try again. And as you say, eventually, with good strategies and, just being relaxed about it, helping convey to the congregation that, hey, we're all going to mess up. My voice would crack. I'd make mistakes and go, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Let's do a retake. And eventually people get to the point that go, oh, okay, we're going to learn something new. And not everybody liked it. I mean, let's be honest about it. There were some who never got with it. But by and large, most people did, and they enjoyed it. It was a bit of fun in the service, if it was that kind of a song, or if it was something rich with meaning, once they had learned it, they were able to engage with that sense of worship. And wow, I'm, connecting here to people from perhaps another part of the world. And I'm thinking about that differently.
Mm-hmm.
Persistence. If there's resistance, you need to have persistence.
That's beautiful, Deb. I was just going to say the notion of resistance. My wife Cheryl and I, we were doing occasional song leadership for a couple of years at one of our cathedral churches here in the Vancouver area. And one of the women in the church came up after we'd been there for a few weeks to Cheryl, because she wouldn't say it to me directly, but why does your husband keep waving his arms around? Why can't he just stand there and sing? It's like there's resistance, right? And it's outside of what people are used to. So it's that notion you're saying, Deb, of staying relaxed is so important, and not getting hung up on the details. Like, yes, we need to know a piece really well internally to be able to lead it. But if we're anxious, everyone will be anxious. So, and the notion of repetition is really important. You know, if, I often, if a piece is new, we'll put it in service music and sing it for weeks on end. Easter season, 7 weeks straight. Repetition really helps learn new music.
You know, it's interesting too, talking about being nervous. Early on at my former church, the youth of the church went away to rendezvous. It was like a month in or something, and they came back and they'd learned this song, My Lighthouse. They were really jazzed up about it. They learned the actions and everything, and it's a contemporary worship music song, which is outside of my training and definitely outside my comfort. And they wanted to do it in the service that they were leading. And I was really nervous and felt that I needed to be really secure in this song in order to lead it for a congregation that would feel insecure about it. And it was a real learning moment because I never got to that place of security. I felt pretty freaked out the whole time. And yet, being in that vulnerable place with the congregation and having other people involved in enlivening that song, which in this case, it wasn't me enlivening the song, it was the youth up front, leading along, doing the actions, teaching that was the way of sort of breaking down the barriers between us.
Just want to encourage people, if you have questions, just use the hand raise function so we know you can kind of bring your voice in. Oh, there we have one. Hey.
Yeah, I just want to ask people who are, because of COVID and live streaming or maybe recording or whatever you're doing with your services, do you capture those teaching times before the service in your live stream and your recording, or do you just cut that part out and start recording or at the beginning of the service? I just wonder how you handle that.
I can respond to that quickly. I generally, when I'm teaching something in worship, I will do it in the service, right before we sing it. I'm less inclined to do it before the service or like in the prelude or something like that. In fact, I almost never do something before the service starts. It's almost always in the moment for me. So it has to be a part of the live stream. We wouldn't be able to block away. In this case, it's out of necessity. Others have a experience there?
Yeah, in my context, at some times in my ministry, we've used that pre-service sing time as the teaching place. But in my current context, there's enough musicians to organize and so on before the service that we don't really have time. So I'm doing what Jason's doing and teaching on the fly during the service. So same kind of thing. I find I don't stop and do whole rote repeat after me teaching, but it's, you might the first time in, you're teaching something a bit more slowly with a bit of a gesture and so on, just to help people, and then you ease in. So it's not stopping the whole service to teach, but it's stretching the first time out to help people settle into something that's newer, and then you carry on. So it's the same thing. It's been built into our live stream.
Karen?
We found that our folks aren't very receptive to the newer music, and so I have used several different techniques. One thing, I will often take a new song and put it into my prelude for a couple of weeks in a row, so that they get used to hearing the tune at least. And then I will sometimes teach it to the choir first and let them do it as an anthem. And then the next time we sing it, it would be as a hymn in the service. And that way we get folks, they get used to hearing it, and it's almost not new anymore because they've heard it and heard it and heard it. So that repetition thing comes into play. We don't,
anything that we are teaching, we teach before the service starts, and then the live stream that we use, it doesn't include the teaching time. So that's just from our point of view.
Those are that's the tried and true technique that we often hear of, sort of incorporating things early, sometimes having the choir sing it first and then introducing it to the congregation so that it builds a little bit of familiarity or comfort with it, especially if it pushes us beyond our comfort. Thanks for sharing, Karen. Byron? Oh, sorry, Jason?
No, I was just going to say that Dr. Fred had said in the chat there, from an education perspective, that specialists tell us that we grasp something better when we do it more. Of course, that makes logical sense to us. That's why we sing Justin Bieber, because we hear it 4 times on the radio, and people in our congregations are saying, "Oh, we sang that hymn last week. Why are we singing it again this week?" Well, we're singing it again because we're going to learn it, and that's a good reason to do it. Like, maybe we could do it even more than that, but I just wanted to point that out, and we have lots of hands now. Woohoo!
Jason, it feels like you have something against Justin Bieber, but let's pass it off to Byron.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I get a little bit of pushback sometimes from just from a liturgy worship point of view, from the pastor or whatever. Just if you want to just kind of take time out of the worship to teach something. So I just get a little bit of that occasionally. It's hard to incorporate that learning moment into the overall flow of the worship. I know there's a way to do it, but there's a bit of an education that has to happen there.
Certainly, yeah, that's one of the reasons why I generally teach stuff before the service starts. But there are sometimes times when it's actually called for to do it in the midst of the service. And it's hard to know when that is, except to just kind of try it out. Because sometimes in the midst of worship, we need to give instructions on how to come up for communion or how to experience a particular reading or something. And this just has to happen in the flow of stuff. And perhaps the leadership of music is the same. We have 2 more hands. I haven't really been keeping track of time, so we probably need to move on shortly to our next question. But let's have Jane and David give their responses, and then we can go forward. Jane? We can't.
No sound, Jane. It says you're unmuted, but
Yeah.
Is that better?
yes.
Okay. Sometimes it helps if you actually tell your congregation why you're teaching it before the service. I mean, we work with grown-ups, and if you have designed your worship service to have a flow to it and you don't want that interruption, and you tell them that, and you ask them for a couple of moments of indulgence before the service, I think people are more likely to give it to you than if it's like, oh, she forgot to teach the choir and so she's doing whatever. But the other thing I wanted to say is, like, this idea of resisting new music. Sometimes I wonder if it's not just that we don't have enough room for singing. Like, we do want to sing the songs that are in our hearts, that we can get our minds in the groove, and we know the words and we know how it feels to sing that song. But that doesn't exclude us adding wonderful things to our worship time if people don't perceive that as taking away. Like, you're not going to take away "The Lord's My Shepherd" in order to sing Andrew Donaldson's "God My Shepherd Gives Me All I Need." That other song is still there and we can still sing it, And I feel like people need to know that you're not replacing beloved, deeply known worship music with new music. You are adding to what they have, and you're not removing anything. And I think if people know that of you, they're probably more likely to learn something. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Thank you. David?
Yeah, I just wanted I just wanted to mention in terms of doing things before the service, when we went to when we had no congregation, we went to online format. The prelude actually became a part of the worship service, and it started at 10:30. So if I was going to do, some singing before church now, that we're getting back together again, I would use that time to do it. So it has become integral with the online service as well. So I think that if you are doing stuff before the service, you can push that into the online part of your service and use it there as well. We've not had a problem with that.
Josh, can I just add one other quick little note to that conversation? One strategy we used here at the church more recently, we probably could have benefited from it more if we'd learned it earlier, like 2.5 years ago, is a couple times we had a new song, a new piece, something that was coming out. And a friend of mine at the church and I, we would sit at the piano, we would do a simple little recording on our iPhone, and then pop it in the Wednesday weekly here at the church. So it would go out to the whole community, they would see a little video, they could sing along, they could learn it before church, and they got it midweek. It's useful. It doesn't always work for everyone if they don't open their emails from the church, but it's just a neat little side thing to do as a consideration.
That's very smart, Jason. It's a lot like the Justin Bieber technique of teaching music, isn't it?
That's right.
True.
Exactly. By the way, I actually
it over and over.
I actually don't mind Justin Bieber in some ways, but I just don't like his songs more than Bruce Harding's. You know?
We haven't mentioned Justin in the last few minutes, so I thought we should bring him in again.
Can I just say one thing?
Sure.
I think, as Bruce was saying, linking something new to a particular time of the year or a particular event, and even learning it in advance. In other words, we're going to be singing this throughout Easter or throughout Lent or Advent, gives people, I think, a sense of purpose, that they are involved in the worship because they are prepared and know that something is going to go on throughout a particular period of time or for a particular service.
Yes, thank you. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Bruce, who will introduce our next topic of discussion.
Thanks, Josh. Well, we've already been talking about this next topic a little bit, because when you talk about, what do you do when you teach and lead, you automatically start talking about some of the barriers. What stops us from being able to teach new music, from stepping into this role? So yes, some of this is just resistance of the people. That's been coming up, right? But there is also a whole side to ourselves. So what stops us from doing this? I know for some of us, and those of us who do accompaniment roles as well, we're always busy physically with that role. With me, it's guitar, and with others, it's keyboard and so on. And so you're used to being active in that kind of a role. And when you step out in front of people to teach a song, you can feel kind of naked without that instrument, without something to support you in that. So that's an example of a kind of a barrier. Other barriers are just the barriers we place on ourselves. My wife Cheryl and I, we were leading at a congregation, an evening of singing, and we were leading music in a lot of different languages. And at the end of the evening, we're with the musician in that community, and she says, our people just don't learn new languages. But I said, but we just sang in 7 or 8 languages, and they seem just fine to me. So I suspect that comes down to barriers, right? If I have decided as a musician that I can't handle new languages, then how do I teach that? How do I teach that? So we impose barriers on ourselves. Our communities impose barriers on us. Their preconceived notions of how we do music in church and so on are barriers. So we thought we'd put it out to the group again to kind of just talk about what are some of the barriers that you identify. What are some challenges around leading, around offering support in this way, musical enlivening in your community. So that would be our next topic for discussion. And Sartu, are we able to have a different round of people in a breakout group this time? Like random again? I guess whatever's easiest for you to set up. If you wanted to send us back into the same groups because it's fast.
They're in the same group, if that's okay.
Okay.
Otherwise, I could do it again and make it random again if you want.
Well, random means we talk to different people, which
Okay. Well,
spreads it around. If you can manage that.
I think
Also, I think as part of this discussion, as she's getting ready, you can talk about what would you as a music leader need? Like what do you need to feel comfortable doing this kind of work? If there's resources that you don't feel you have, all of that extra training, those kinds of things. Like workshops like this are a good gateway to these discussions. But if you have reflections on things that you need specifically to do this work, then feel free to toss those out into the discussion as well. Do you two have anything else to add to this while we're waiting? Whoopsie, Jason's standing up for a minute.
okay, I'm going to put them in the room now.
Oh, here we go. Good. Okay. Thank you, Sartu. Well, I don't know about all of you. I found that discussion time a bit short. Good conversation going on regarding some of the barriers. You know, I know in my group there was a lot of discussion regarding language itself can be a barrier, having to make sure we know language and that we have those resources available to us to help us learn language so we can teach it. We talked about time being a barrier, both time in our own prep, you know, because churches, as I said to our group, churches only give you so many hours. And you might have had a really rough week and you didn't have time to prep that song to be able to teach it well. So that's a barrier. Or time in the worship. Maybe you have a preacher who likes to preach long sermons and then wonders why you can't just cut a hymn to make space for the spoken word. So, you know, there are many issues. So let's see what kind of reactions we get from others. Anybody want to put their hand up? Offer reflections, their own reflections or reflections from the group. They were in the breakout room. Oh, you're all quiet on this one. Too many. Oh, there's Diana. I say too many barriers, but
some people in our group were finding that languages were a big barrier. I know that even for our congregation, it can be a challenge. And also our confidence, if we're not, music directors aren't singers and the range of some of the hymns is too high for us to teach it. That's like a soprano line. I know that some of the ones some of them are either, I know a lot of more voices is more singable, but some of the voices united, you go way up. But I was saying that we have a new minister now from Africa, and he's very vibrant, and he's got the whole congregation just eating out of his hand, and they just want to get up and dance with him. So I think they get more willing to do stuff the more enthusiastic you are. So.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Diana. The question of language being a barrier, that's something that we as a church, as the national church, need to continue to address. For More Voices, there are audio recordings as part of the More Voices audio collection of people, native speakers of the language, saying the text so you can hear it repeatedly. I think we need to keep doing more of that kind of work. And also the pronunciation guides at the bottom of the page in More Voices, the same kind of attempt to give people a phonetic way of saying the language. So that can help with language, but language will always be a barrier. You know, many of us function in fairly unilingual congregations. And so it's asking people to step outside of their comfort zone. You know, why do we have to sing in another language? We're all English speakers here. That can be a challenge too, just to encourage people to see themselves as part of the wider community. I was saying to our small group that this is part of that whole reason why the United Church chose to start the whole intercultural church initiative and the anti-racism initiative and so on, is to break us out of that dominance of our unilingual culture and help us to see that there's a breadth of expression of Christian tradition that we can honor and help to be open to. So David has a hand up.
Yeah, I think that the whole idea of enthusiasm is really important when you're introducing something new to the congregation. If you go into church and you say, "Okay, guys, we've got this thing in Japanese and we've got to learn it, and here we go," you're going to get a different kind of response than if you go, "Hey guys, this is this Japanese song and it's really cool and you can sing this and this is how you're going to do it." It'll give you a completely different response, I think, to your congregation.
Oh, your enthusiasm really comes through there.
I think it makes a difference. I think it does.
Yeah, the attitude, the way we present things really matters, for sure. Yeah, like we have to be at the point where, I try and have absorbed something so I don't have to look at the page anymore when I'm teaching a new song like that. So I can just say it goes like this and just deliver it. And then, as Diana was saying, we don't all have perfect voices, so we have to get comfortable with the fact that our voices crack and we might not be singing perfectly in tune and so on. But that in some ways, that erases a barrier for people, because it's not like you're a big soloist. It's like, oh, I could never match that. So owning the humanness of who we are as singers can help engage too. Yeah, Fred has a contribution for us.
Thanks, Bruce. I wanted to bring up the point that sometimes the room is a barrier.
Yes.
I can't tell you the number of epiphanies in congregations when I have people face each other across the aisle, across the central aisle, because the longitudinal architecture does not give people the sense they're with very many other people. And if you feel you're singing with others, it's a great boost to learning new things and or repeating old things. I also wanted to hold up for everybody my favorite button. If they're standing on carpet, you can kiss acoustics goodbye. You can order these from GIA. I've given away 98 of my 100 that I ordered. Carpet bedrooms, not churches.
There, thank you. That's what I was looking for. Thank you, Fred. Yeah, our buildings are barriers. Like I see Chris Bowman is here with us. I was leading a big event out at his church in Truro, Nova Scotia a number of years ago. And, it's a large space, and we had probably 300 people in the building who were singing lustily, and I'm going great guns, we're having a blast. But I'm saying to myself, I can't even hear them singing because the space is 1,000 plus it seats, and 300 people singing lustily could not make that room come to life. So I know my own experience. I'm in an amalgamated congregation, and the former sanctuary, which I had to work in for the first couple of years while they were building a new space, was designed to be completely acoustically dead so that the PA system would work really well. And they all were fine with it. And I said, I'm only taking this job if we're ripping all the acoustic paneling off the walls or you're building a new space. And their first time when they got out of that space and into a space that was reverberant, they started to sing, and everybody's turning around and looking at each other because they can hear each other for the first time. It makes such a difference. So I do that also by my choir singers sit with the people when we're leading new music. And that's kind of just a sneaky way, right? Everybody, when you hear a group of people around you, oh, they already know this one. I must be able to sing this too. When there's others who already know the piece and can sing in their midst, and that helps too. Deb has something for us.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to add on to the discussion about languages being a barrier. And I can appreciate people are afraid to learn a different language. And in today's world where we're so concerned about disrespecting a culture or perhaps, butchering a language, I mean, it really is important for the leader to be comfortable with the language, but the payoff has to do, like, when people are able to sing comfortably in that language, even if it's just one verse, something happens when they sing, right? Is if that's the original language of the piece, those words were intended to be sung on those notes at those sometimes particular pitches, sometimes not. But the creation of the formants, and I don't want to get too technical, but the way that affects sound in the air, which then enters the body, right? And sometimes you just can't get that with a good English translation the way you can get it with the original language. And so, if you're in a space that's reasonably acoustically good, so that there is some reverb and the sound waves are moving throughout the space and able to touch bodies and enter bodies, it gives people a reason without having to intellectualize about it. It's like, yeah, this really makes me feel good singing it in Japanese or in Zulu or whatever the language might be. So anyway.
Yeah, thanks, Deb. That's the question of whether singing another language is a barrier or not is a theological question too. It's an invitation to see us as part of the worldwide communion of God, rather than just being, what we are in our own particular context. But it's not easy. I had a big argument in a meeting with Marcus Borg a number of years back about this very issue. Marcus was convinced that if you force him to sing in another language, that it's too much of a barrier, so he can't worship anymore. Whereas I was trying to encourage him to see it as an invitation to stretch, to find your place in the worldwide communion. But there's limits to this, right? Like trying to throw a 4-verse hymn in Mandarin at your congregation is too much, right? You might be able to do 1 verse, but that's why shorter songs are so great for giving that little taste of a language and getting it into people, and then they can share it. We had a group from our church that went to Kenya, and they were able to just sing in Swahili to people there, and when they met them, because we sing 3 or 4 Swahili pieces from our hymn books, and it breaks down those barriers around the world. So I'm all in favor, but recognize that it continues to be a barrier for people for a variety of reasons. So we do need to have those theological discussions about why do we do this. It's not just to confuse you, it's to invite you to stretch beyond your sense of what makes worship work. Yep, Jane has a comment to throw in there.
I just wanted to say, if your congregation isn't joining right in when you're teaching a song, maybe figure out what it feels like out there. Like, I have tried to do this in places where the lighting at the front, at the front of the sanctuary where the instruments are, was pretty good. And the lighting out there in the pews kind of depended on, these high pendant lights that were way up there and weird colored light coming in from the stained glass windows. And people were, holding their piece of paper and trying to figure out what they're doing. And I had a couple of times here in Gorbet, way back when I was doing music at Lions United here, where we moved people to where the light was good. And it makes a big difference if you're singing something unfamiliar, even in English, if you can see what you're meant to see. And I think that sometimes that we're so used to the spots in the building that we use that we don't really know what our congregation is experiencing. And if you sort of sit in the shadowy corner, you don't hear as well, you don't see as well. And you have to maybe find a way to if you can't, spend the money to improve the lighting, find a way to invite people into the well-lit parts. I think the same thing is sometimes with accessibility. People will maybe sit on the aisle way back rather than filling in the pew up front because it's hard for them to get in and out. And having some chair rows instead of some pew rows has made a big difference in a couple of places where I've worked. So just some thoughts.
Thank you. That comes back to some of what Fred was saying regarding how our spaces can be barriers. And it is very true. So how do we overcome the barriers? Becoming aware of them is really the first step, isn't it? I know I'm just thinking about the issue. I've gone to meet the people when we've been into a new church, and you invite people to move forward when they fill the back of the church. And if they really won't, some places nobody will move, then you move and join them. Or you encourage people to, like when I teach something and I say over to you, I literally mean that, over to you. If people get used to the fact that it's really up to them, rather than us always continuing to provide all the sound so they don't have to sing, right? You do get more response from people when they can see, oh, they look around and say, oh, it really is us. It's my moment. Then you get an entirely different reaction from singers. But solving those lighting issues, solving the acoustical issues in our spaces is really important. So being aware and asking for solutions with good reasons, right? Why they can't sing because they can't see the notes on the page is a pretty good thing to take to your church board, I would say. Kevin has something for us.
Just to tag, I'll comment along to this, that we at St. Andrews moved to a flexible seating arrangement. We took out the pews and have chairs in our space now. And post-pandemic, we have limited the number of seats we have in the room to the number of people we are expecting, or approximately the number of people we're expecting to see in worship. And so where before we may have had 200 seats, 250 seats or something like that for an expected congregation of 150, 170 or so. And so the room would seem full with that dispersal. But post-pandemic, or these days, between 50 and 100, maybe 70, 75 people coming to worship. And so we'll put in 80 or 100 seats and also bring people forward. So we have this luxury of flexibility because we've changed our seating configuration. The pews have gone and we have flexible seating. But it's been a real gift in that it has helped our singing, that we can move people forward. We can make a even with distancing have a sense of proximity and closeness about us, and that encourages singing in our space.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kevin. And yes, it is a lovely space that you folks have created there. It's quite amazing. But that is a good point. If we have flexibility, we can bring people closer together. I know years back, my dad got in big trouble because he roped off the back half of the church. He got tired of everyone always sitting in the back. He just roped it off. You can't sit there anymore. After a few weeks of people being really mad, they started to understand that, oh, we can sing better. We're enjoying worship more. We're appreciating each other more. So it became, and then the ropes could disappear and people would start to move further in. That's a dangerous thing to do, to mess with people's space, but it makes all the difference. All the difference. Oh, Byron has a comment for us too.
I tried the roped off once. It didn't go so well.
But good for you for trying.
I was in Arnprior near Ottawa. There's also a bit of a funding issue. I know a lot of churches want to make some changes, and it's just a matter of there's just not enough. They're trying to find grants, etc., that will allow for for revamping their lighting and their sound to make it acoustics better, and changing the seating, etc. So. Just to throw that out there, that there are some fundraising concerns to allow to remove some of these physical barriers that may make our worship experiences better.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's very true. Money is the bugbear for everything, isn't it, in church? I've been in sanctuaries where they literally just rip out the back pews, remove them from the space so that people can no longer use them, which feels a bit harsh, but that's a free, with a bit of manual labor, way of improving your space and making people sit together. And it is being creative in tough times, because we know the church has all kinds of money struggles these days. So, my workshop coming up later in the event on live streaming on a budget is the same kind of idea. How do we do these kinds of things without having a ton of money? So it continues to be an issue. Anybody else? Sounds like I can turn it over to Jason, who's going to raise our third question for us.
Yeah, great discussion, everyone. So here we are, a group of fairly practical people, I would say, musicians trying to figure out how to get people to sing, how to inspire them to sing. And very seldom do we actually have a lot of time in our limited hours to ask the question why. And actually, the question why really matters. And we all know that, because the question why is probably connected to why we actually do it, or decided at some point we wanted to do it, or felt connected to helping other people do it. But I think it would be amiss for us to not just take a few minutes today to talk and remind ourselves, or maybe help ourselves to reimagine and rediscover why, because the why can also change a little bit over time. So if we don't ask the question once in a while, we might miss some growth and some learning edges from within ourselves. So why do we want to help people to sing? Why do we want to help to enliven the church's song? So get on your best philosophy hats and your theology hats. Get ready to talk a little bit in that space. We're going to go into our groups again and just share with each other, why is this important? Why are we getting people to sing? And then we'll come back and we'll share a little bit together around the why. So, Sartu, we'll pass it off to you to split us up.
Do you want the same group, or do you want to switch them around?
If it's no trouble to switch, I think switching is nice in terms of getting different people in different groups. But I can be flexible, certainly, Sartu. Thanks for that. Welcome back to the space. Is everyone back in the space, I think? Yes? The rooms are closed. I hope you are having some lively discussions. We certainly were here in the chapel at Islington. Let's see some hands go up, and let's think about a little more about why we're doing it anyways. Why is it worth it to dedicate 90 minutes at a conference together to talk about it? Any thoughts? Or else you're gonna have to listen to me talk. I mean, I've got lots of notes. I can just talk, no problem. David.
So we talked about the fact that music allows some kind of expression that you don't get from the spoken word, and the benefits that there might be through that to your health, and also the benefits of community participation. But I think that there's certainly something that can be expressed both in giving and receiving through music that cannot be done through the spoken word.
Thank you, David. Who's next? Just jump right in. Let's get a whole bunch of responses, and then we'll start to put them all together. I feel like there's going to be some overlap here.
What do you want?
Byron? Go ahead.
I'm just trying to decide, is this just a job, or is this become, I've done it for 50 years. I don't want it to become, well, it's just a job. It's still still has to have that enlivening feeling and that joy of that calling that I was called to do 50 years ago.
Oh, I love the word calling. Also, just if you could just look at your screens and make sure you're muted. We hear some typing, some as I'm talking, some background sounds. Just go ahead and remute yourselves, please. Yeah, I think you're fine. There we go. Yeah, great. Thanks for that, Byron. Let's see, Lori.
I think our wonderful little group there, I'm always sad that they're only like 30 seconds long, or it feels like 30 seconds long, but I think that we came to the conclusion that, you know, for the four of us, it's what we've always known, but not only that, the thing is, like whatever, you know, other people are saying, that it's a voice that, you know, when you can't speak through words, right, there is always music, right? It's our contribution to the service, and it's trying to capture that whole mood of the actual entire service, right? But the question that came up that I asked the congregation is, or I asked our little group was, are we the lucky ones here, the ones who are here at the conference, that we have very supportive congregations that, you know, are very music oriented? Because I have played in churches where music is just so secondary. It's like, you know, we have to sing a hymn now, or yeah, let's sing an amen, you know, but it's not a priority. So we're the lucky ones here, I think.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that, Lori. And let me just say, as we're continue to go through here, that what better shout out do we need than for the importance of Music United and our gatherings like this than statements like that? We know that there are many congregations around us that where the musician has a difficult time, where the priorities are different, and where we want to sort of be able to speak in and be supportive. So I think that's a great point. Debbie, sorry. There is a Deb here too, but this is Debbie.
Yeah, we were talking about the importance of participation. Music is the thing that, you know, I mean, there's other things too, but that gives an opportunity for people to be real participants in the service, and articulate the words of the faith themselves. And so that was really important. That kind of alongside community and community buildings, sort of as part of that as well.
Thanks, Debbie. Anyone else want to throw in some other insights?
I was just going to throw in something that I was talking about with our group. Like partly we're singing off. This sounds like stating the obvious, but we sing because it's part of our grand Protestant tradition, right? The people have always sung for the past 500 plus years. So it's how do we continue to make it vital? So it's not just, that's what we've always done, that famous phrase, right? That's what we've always done.
Right. Because, and that's why we're asking why. Exactly, Bruce. Dee?
Yeah, we were talking about how memory plays such an important role in our faith formation, and that long after sermons have been delivered, it's the music that remains in our memories. And so when we get to end of life, and you know, we know many people who are suffering from Alzheimer's or dementia, and they don't remember their family members or you know, books they've read or anything else, but you start singing a hymn, a song to them from long ago, and their eyes just light up, and they can join in, and they remember the words. And it's, you know, the music drives the theology down really deep inside us, and the music is the last memory that remains in the mind. And so it's so crucial for people who are facing end of life to have that to hang on to and be able to respond to and give them comfort and hope. And so we're giving our congregation such a gift by sharing that music with them.
Yeah, what a description of an essential service you just gave us there, Dee. And more than our congregations, because our congregations are connected to communities, and that's just going to make this sort of rippling effect all the way out into the spaces around us. I think as we were talking here in this space, and as we put our ideas together here, I think there are some really key threads. And one of them is that, why do we sing? Because it creates community. Because when we sing together, something magical happens, something mysterious happens, something special happens right in our very midst, and we feel connected. I can go to a church I can go to a church in London, in England, and not know a single person, and 2 or 3 hymns in, I feel some sense of connection. There's not many other things I could use as a vehicle to have that kind of experience, but art does that, right? It gets us there. Also, go ahead, Bruce.
I was just going to throw in, Cheryl reminded me that the mission statement for the Hymn Society, our North American Hymn Society, is, we believe that the holy act of singing together shapes faith, heals brokenness, transforms lives, and renews peace.
Right. I think you just gave us the answer. You reminded us of the answer. I mean, there's that community building piece. Why else do we sing? People were talking about theology and learning, but also it's for many of us, it's the principal way that we connect with the divine, especially for those of us that there's music in us, right? I mean, how many people do we speak to from week to week who say, "Oh, I don't know how to pray. Oh, I don't know how to. I'm not spiritual enough to." But then they open their mouth and sing, and what comes out is pure prayer. I mean, music does that. It gets us into that space, and if we can get people singing, if kids know that Justin gets his peaches down in Georgia, but doesn't know, anything about, doesn't know the Beatitudes, or doesn't know the Lord's Prayer, or doesn't, have some basic sort of sense of then we're missing something along the way there. And our song can do that. We all know that. We've experienced that. Byron's got your hand up. Go ahead. Yeah,
just the old phrase, singing is praying twice.
Yeah, that came up in our group too. Margaret mentioned that as well in our group, right? We had so many neat things we were talking about here. I was thinking about how music often, why are we singing? Because when people come back to church, for those who move away from church and then come back, or people who are even coming into church for the first time because there's some interest in faith, I have many experiences where when they come back or when they're in the space, because they have had an experience of music in high school or in elementary school, it could even be several decades ago, there is just a spark already there. And maybe they didn't even know it was there. And as soon as they begin singing, or as soon as they enter into a music space, there's almost an instantaneous connection. Why are we getting people to sing? Because it kind of those burning embers, those burning coals, they can just easily spark into flame again, something that was already there. People will be joining our choir. Things will happen because of that. Music has the ability to do that, certainly. Anyone else have any reasons why we're...
I was just going to, something that came out of our discussion that I haven't heard yet in our small group was the question of language and so on, like how our role collectively with our clergy, however music is chosen, etc., in our congregation, but what we sing really matters. The language we sing really matters, which is why hymn language has changed over the years. So that's another big part of it too. Why do we sing? We communicate, but if we're not being careful about what we're communicating, then we're not doing our job well either. I'd rather our 2- and 3-year-olds learn something like, "Don't be afraid, my love is stronger." I'd rather they have that in their heart than, "Jesus bids us shine," or something like that was for a past generation. So it's vital, very vital.
I find too, in my experience, the first time I encountered what we call global songs, so songs from around the world, was in a course at university, and it really threw me off because I joined a community choir as part of it, and most of the people in the choir were not what we would call, trained musicians. And so everything was taught mostly by rote or by ear. And for someone who was studying music, who's used to learning music off the page, this was an incredible incredible experience that gets you as a leader thinking, okay, what is it like to learn music or to be taught music, to become sort of a student again of of song. And so I value, like, the why of it for me is being put in a bit of an uncomfortable place as a leader, as a member of a congregation, to receive something that's outside of the ordinary, and to try and sort of figure out, how do I fit into that.
I was just going to throw in here, Lydia put up some of the prefatory materials from Then Let Us Sing, and some people might not have access to chat. So this is from our new hymn resource we're working on. We see the work of animating congregational song as an antidote to fear. We become in our singing signs of life and hope for the church. Then Let Us Sing is a hopeful investment in the future of the church and an expression of who we are, who we want to become in relationship with each other, and who God calls us to be. After all, by singing each other's songs, we grow in our communities and into the world.
That's really beautiful. That's really beautiful.
Lydia.
I was just thinking, as it approaches 3 o'clock, that I had jotted down when I was talking with my group here. You've heard it said, we are what we eat, but actually for us, I think probably we believe, or perhaps even are, what we sing. And I think that really matters. It's an important piece for us. I don't know if we could end this little portion of it with a song. Could we do a song, guys, gals, everyone? I have a song in front of me here.
Go for it.
I would love to teach it to you.
Yeah.
I don't have great space. Some of you might already know it. And I'd like to share the whole text with you, though it is not a short text. I could post it in the chat so you can see it. I wonder how many of you are familiar with the Catholic, where did you go? Here you are. The Catholic hymn writer, Bernadette Farrell. She's British. She was at the Hymn Society gathering in Kitchener-Waterloo a few years ago, and I was really, really moved by her music. And she has a setting of Psalm 139. Some of you might know it. So if you do, I won't be teaching it to you, but I'm going to post it in the chat. It's called, "O God, You Search Me and Know Me." And I thought maybe I would just teach you the first verse, just with a bit of call and response. I'm not really in a place where I can help too much with my hand, but I might be able to model that a little bit. And I put the text there so you can see it. So I'm not totally going to make you learn only by rote, but you can close the chat if you don't want to see it. And if you don't know it, this is how it goes. I wonder if I should give myself a note. It goes like this. O God, you search me and you know me. You try. O God, you search me and you know me. All my thoughts lie open to your gaze. All my thoughts lie open to your gaze. When I walk or lie down, you are before me. When I walk or lie down, you are before me. Ever the maker and keeper of my days. Ever the maker and keeper of my days. And that last line again goes, ever the maker and keeper of my days. Ever the maker and keeper of my days. Try another verse with me. We'll just sing it together, the second verse. You know my resting and my rising. You discern my purpose from afar, and with love everlasting you besiege me in every moment of life or death you are. And every verse is just that beautiful. Her hymn writing is just really, really gorgeous. I would commend her work to you. And this song was at my covenanting here at Islington United, and I just can't get tired of it. It's too beautiful. So I would leave that song with you.
That's beautiful, Jay. Thank you. And I loved how you did still lead us with your hands, but you did it in a very small kind of a way, right? That's so important to adjust what we do. You know, when I'm song leading with 1,000 people, the gestures are a lot larger than when it's intimate. And so being flexible in how we lead is so important. And you caught the fact that that last phrase could give people a bit of struggle, so you repeated, and you know, that's good song leading technique, I would say. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I had a couple people in the room with me who struggled with it, so I was helping them as well.
That's why it's important to be listening to your people.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. Because they might surprise you. They might miss a phrase that you think is easy and catch one you think is hard. So beautiful. Thank you.